Hello and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Stephen Knight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about how do you tell if a developer is any good or not. And we've got 5 checks that you can do online yourself at home. And this is really interesting because I had a journalist call me up the other day, Andrew, Sally Lindsay from NZ Property Investor magazine. And she said, you know, now that Duval is basically falling over as in statutory management, what are some checks people can do online to figure it out? And I thought, to be honest, Sally, sometimes it's really difficult to actually figure this out. So we've put our heads together, and Andrew and I have the 5 checks that we think you guys can do online to check out any developer. Because what can go wrong with a developer, Andrew?
Well, things like just developers behaving badly, especially. So I was saying to an investor just the other day, it's one thing to have a contract with someone, right? You might have a contract that you think protects you, but it's how the developer's going to actually behave. And if you got into a litigation dispute with a developer, they've probably got more money than you. So you've got to know that they're actually going to do the right thing. And what do I mean by the right thing? Well, things like actually delivering the product. If a developer tips over halfway through, like Duval have, is someone else going to step in? Are they going to finish it to the same quality? Are you going to get your deposit back? Have they taken that money? Because that's sometimes an issue. But are they going to actually deliver the product that they said they're going to? And is it going to have the appliances that they said? So, for example, a lot of developer contracts will have substitution clauses. So if they can't get the kitchen or they can't get the shower that they've said that they're going to put in, they've got the ability to substitute it. Now, I've seen situations where developers switch out a shower and they say, well, it's still a shower, but it's completely inferior a product. And that's not what someone wants to have in their finished investment property or their final home.
So maybe you're paying for top quality and then you get not so top quality. The other big one is sunset clauses where developers might use them in an unethical way.
Yeah, so sometimes you'll see there'll be a sunset clause, a drop dead date where, okay, if the developer hasn't finished the project by the 30th of June, 2027, okay, well, now I can cancel the contract. Does the developer then slow down the progress of the build because the market's got up and then they've got the ability to cancel that contract as well, and now they go sell the property for more money?
And so what are those checks that you can do online? The first one is really obvious, which is to go straight online and Google them, but people don't actually do this. My favorite place to go is actually Google News.
Yeah.
So let's take the example of Reed Myers. And this is a development company we started talking about in 2022. And you could have gone back to Google News, even back in 2002, and started to see some warning signs. There was actually this one recently where a buyer had paid $175K for some homes that may never be built. The developer said it was a good deal. And even if you look...
Always good when a developer endorses their own product.
There was even this one back in June 2022. Property developer Reed Myers offers opportunity to leave troubled project. There were some warning signs all the way back then, but unfortunately, some people wouldn't have seen those warning signs, wouldn't have gone to Google, wouldn't have dug in, and wouldn't have seen some of those issues. So the first thing, really simple, but go to Google News, search for not only the name of the company, but also the names of some of those directors. But then, of course, Google doesn't pick everything up. So where else would you go, Andrew?
Then I think you go to the company's office and I would search for the company you're buying off, but also any holding companies. So, for example, a lot of developers might have Armour Street Construction Limited, and that will be the holding company for that particular project. Then they might have a holding company, which is the one that you probably want to dig more into. And I want to look for things like the directors, the shareholders, and look for things like, for Reed Myers, you want to look for Peter Shevin and then see whether or not he's got any tarnished background.
Well, let's dig into that. So if you go to the NZ Companies Office, you can search for any company in New Zealand. And if we type Reed Myers in and we go to Reed Myers Triangle Limited, so that's the actual development project that they're working on. So I think it was on a company called Triangle Road. We dig in and we see there are 4 shareholdings with a whole range of people in there. So we could dig in and have a look at Graham Shepherd or Peter Ecton, which are some of the shareholders. And also, the director, Graham Shepherd, we could start to dig into that as well. So that's how you go from knowing the company name to then knowing, well, who are the directors of the company. One thing I will mention, little trick, is sometimes when you're on a website, you can't actually tell, well, what is the formal limited liability name of the company? I always go to the terms and conditions or the privacy policy because it should have stated what the name of the actual company is so you can then search it. But then one person I know reached out to me and said, well, Ed, the interesting case with Reed Myers
He was never on there.
was that there was this guy, Peter Shevin, who was never actually on there. He worked for the company, but wasn't a director. Now, the reason that he wasn't on there is that if you go to the Insolvency Register, which is the third place I recommend you go, and we type in Peter Shevin, who was the guy who was involved, we can see that he was unfortunately made insolvent 3 times. He was bankrupt 3 times. And if you Google his name, you'll see a couple of failed development projects in there. And so that would be a bit of a warning sign.
A bit of a warning sign.
Well, it'd be a huge warning sign. But actually, there was another example with the company's office that you brought up recently about a company in Tauranga.
So someone actually asked me the other day, because we've got our developers that we recommend and we don't recommend list quite publicly on our website. And someone asked about Flower Day Homes. Now,
So if we go to the company's register and we look for Flower Day Homes and we dig in, we can then see the directors and then do our little Google search. Now, the one you'd asked to have a little bit of a Google about was Ricky Flowerday.
Yeah. Now, just to be clear, I'd previously worked with Ricky at a previous company. So he was an employee at another company, and we had some really good results working with them. But he was not the owner of the company. Now that he's gone out on his own, I've got a kind of a different opinion in terms of whether or not that might be too risky. So if you Google Rick Flowerday, what comes up, Ed?
So we've got Blue Chip Quartet to Face the Music, the Blue Chip Scandal, the franchise deal.
Yeah. So Rick was one of the founders of a company called Blue Chip. If you haven't heard of Blue Chip, they were a property investment developer who took large deposits and ended up getting in a lot of trouble back in the last GFC.
Yeah, and in fact, if you want to dig a little bit more into that and some of the fraud that went on, we wrote a really good article a couple of years ago, 6 actionable lessons property investors can learn from Blue Chip's failure. If producer Dave reminds me, we'll link that down in the show notes because that's a particularly good article. But that again is where you can start to use the company's register to find a company name, find out who's in charge of it, then go do a Google search, go to the Insolvency Register, see if there's any history of business failure, because that is really starting to do our due diligence. But what's interesting when it comes to the Insolvency Register, Andrew, is I know for you at least, if somebody had, say, one bankruptcy in the past, that might not totally turn you off, because I saw that Ryan Matthews on the deal came on and Vanessa asked him a question about being previously made bankrupt, but you still said yes to the deal. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I don't think that bankruptcy necessarily shapes someone in terms of what's going to happen in the future, but I do want to ask more questions if someone has been made bankrupt before. It's whether or not people are open and honest about it. And actually, it's really interesting. One of the investors that I'm working with at the moment just bought one of the units in Ryan's developments, and they were looking at 2 developments that were very comparable. And one of the deciding factors was how honest he was on the deal about that bankruptcy. They said they really respected it.
Okay, that's interesting. Now let's come to the next online check you can do. And this one takes a couple of paid tools, but using a service like Relab or Property Guru to check who owns the land. Talk to us about that.
So what you want to do is you want to find out, does the developer already own the land? And if not, do they have a contract to buy the land, and is it unconditional? Now, why is that important? Well, the developer might sell off a bunch of units but not be able to get their pre-sales that are required to get the project to go ahead. So if I'm the buyer and I've purchased one of the early stages and then the deal doesn't go ahead because the developer is not unconditionally purchasing the land, then all of a sudden I've wasted a bunch of time.
Okay, and I suppose that it's really about whether you get your hopes up or not as well, and just be understanding how likely is it that this house is actually going to get built. So go into a Relab or a Property Guru through Core Logic to see, do they actually own the land? And you can certainly ask about it. And the last one is a really interesting website that I remember during one of our webinars, we actually crashed this website.
Really?
Yeah. It's the New Zealand Legal Information Institute, which is like, if you go to it, it is a very basic website. But what we ended up, I love it, by the way. But I remember we were sharing it on a webinar, and then I think there were like 1,000 people trying to access it, and nobody could get in because I think we crashed it. But you can search pretty much any developer to see, are there any ongoing legal disputes? Now, if you were to like input almost anybody who's been in business for 10, 20, 30 years, there's probably some legal dispute that has come up in the past, but you just want to go through and see whether any of them make you feel really, really uncomfortable. Now, let's not bag on Duval too much. What's another developer you might like to check out?
Let's pick on DDL. Chuck them in.
So that is another construction company that actually did go into liquidation not that long ago. Was it liquidation or receivership?
They had different parts of their business go into receivership.
So you might go in and look at DDL Homes Limited. They went to the High Court. So what was the issue there? So they were going up against Auckland Council. So you might go in there, figure out what was going on, see if it makes you nervous about that specific developer.
And it's good just to read through some of these cases because you can see how someone is arguing their case and whether or not they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and there was actually a situation, I know, where we were looking at a developer and then we went through the New Zealand Legal Information Institute and we saw who their lawyer was. We were uncomfortable with their lawyer because of some of the other bad press that we'd seen come up on Google News and Google. And so we decided not to go ahead with that one. But this kind of just gives you some of these extra tools that you can go online and check out. Kind of bonus number 6 is our list of the developers we recommend and the ones we don't. We list them all publicly online, all 97 of them. And I'll tell you what, Andrew, one thing that I'm planning on doing or hoping to do in the not so distant future, hopefully this year, is I want to create the developer database because it is very difficult for people to do all of this research online, go and look at Google reviews, go and look at how many properties are they actually building, all of these things. So I'm hoping to have a page on our website for the top 200 developers in the country, pulling all of that information together just to make it a little bit easier for people as well. So I usually like to announce these things on the podcast.
Then it forces you to actually do it because
That's
I'll ask you. Yeah.
That's actually the reason I do it. Because
yeah, no, I'm aware.
And then someone will say, when's that coming? I'm like, oh yeah, I really need to get onto that because that was a good idea. So hopefully we'll have that within the next kind of 3 to 6 months.
Oh, that's quite soon. Now, one of the other things that I'd recommend people do as well is if you're going to buy something off a developer and they've already developed a few properties, is go and actually have a look at them. So look at something, maybe not something that's finished right now, maybe something that's finished maybe a couple of years ago. And, that 2-year test is quite good because if you go around to the development and it just looks a bit ratty, then probably the property that you're going to buy is going to look a bit ratty later on. It probably is a sign that the residents association isn't keeping on top of the maintenance or the gardening and all those kind of things. And that really affects the value of your property, whether it's an owner-occupied property or an investment for the future. And, maybe also look at whether or not the developer's building different styles as well. You don't necessarily want to have a developer that's doing 1,000 of the same properties every single year. Because, well, what does that mean when I go and sell my property in 10 years' time? If I'm competing with the developer's brand new product, well, surely people are just going to go buy that brand new product if it's just the same.
So the 5 things you could look out for, go to Google News, check out the NZ Companies Office, check out the Insolvency Register. We've also got, oh gosh, what was number 4?
Legal.
No, that wasn't number 4.
Oh,
What was it?
Relab.
Oh, number 4 was Relab and Property Guru. And then also the New Zealand Legal Information Institute. And if you want a bonus one, go and check out our list of the developers we recommend and the ones we don't as well. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you're listening to this on the podcast, on your Spotify, on your Apple podcast, you want to check out some of the things we're showing on our screens, just Google Opus Partners YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. We release new videos on here every Monday and Wednesday. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
I'm Andrew Nicol.
We're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.